Referendum debate with only 30 days to go. I'm sure you'll all be part of history, taking part here in a decision about Scotland's future. So, my name is Tomlie McNeill. I'll be chairing this event this evening, but we have a very distinguished panel for you. I'm sure they don't actually need an introduction, but just so we know who's going to be speaking and in what order. First, we'll hear from Neil Findlay, MSP, one of the new members who certainly made his mark in the chamber, that's for sure. Then we'll be followed by the well-known Professor John Foster, who will be speaking shortly after that. I'm sure you're all familiar with the work that John has done in the political movement over many years in bringing this, helped to bring this event together, in fact. And Agnes, Tomlie, who has been an absolute legend as far as I'm concerned in the trade union movement. She just arrived from Orkney, literally. She has been doing her bit in the referendum campaign, of course. I admire, as many women do, the work that she's done for women in the trade union movement. And last but certainly not least, we have George Galloway, MP, who will be our main speaker for this evening, who's been literally, I think, setting the referendum campaign on fire with some of the public events he's been doing so far. I'm sure tonight will be no different. So I'm sure you're going to have an enjoyable evening. So the platform are roughly going to take up 55 minutes to 60 minutes to have their say, and then it's over to you for your contributions and questions. So without further ado, I'd like to firstly invite Neil Findlay, MSP, to their seat.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here to put forward the Labour case for a no vote in the referendum we face in just a few weeks' time. And that is a Labour case not for the status quo, not for things to remain the same, but a case that demands and will deliver change. Change based on socialist values of cooperation, community, solidarity and justice. And I wouldn't insult anyone here by asking them to vote for the status quo. I want change as much as anyone in this room, but I believe in my head and my heart that change for working people has been delivered in the past through united action across the UK, led by the Labour and trade union movement, and it will be best delivered once again by those progressive forces. And it's on that basis I ask you to vote no on September the 18th, but to make change happen from the 19th. And it's a pleasure to be in such a fantastic venue in this great city to put forward that case. Because this city and its history epitomises what can be achieved when working people stick together. A city of radicalism and justice, where people care about each other and their brothers and sisters across the UK and indeed the wider world. Because the people of Glasgow understand struggle. They know that they face the same problems, the same dangers and challenges as a person in Liverpool, or Manchester or Swansea. They share that solidarity that binds working class communities together through shared experience, whether that is good or bad. And it is the recognition of that solidarity that I believe has been fundamental to the trade union movement making its decision on the referendum. That's why the National Union of Mine Workers, the steel workers, the shop workers, the train drivers and all the other trade unions are urging their members to vote no on the referendum. It's my view that they are right to have taken that decision. So for me, the debate over Scotland's future shouldn't be a competition between two competing flags. It shouldn't be a debate between Braveheart nationalism on one side and Union Jack unionism on the other. The debate has to be about what type of country we want to see, what kind of country we want to live in, and crucially how we advance the cause and interest of working people. That's what brought me into the labour movement. My politics are rooted in the values I was taught growing up in a mining community in West Lothian. Values of cooperation, solidarity and fairness. Values that have shaped my life and my attitude to politics. So for me, the present debate is not about borders and flags, but it's about class and community. And I will always have more in common with someone from a mining community in South Wales or Yorkshire than I ever will have with Brian Souter, a Highland Laird or an Edinburgh hedge fund manager. The question for me, therefore, has to be how we change the lives of working people for the better. Now, do we accept the counsel of despair that says that Britain can never change? That we can end apartheid in South Africa, we can have a black president, and we can see change across Latin America, but somehow, uniquely, Britain cannot change? Do we say to our brothers and sisters in England, Wales, and across the rest of the UK that we're withdrawn politically from the social and economic relationship we share? And do we withdraw all our non-Tory MPs from Westminster, leaving the rest of the UK to the probability of even more Tory futures? Well, let me say, I want political change to improve the lives of working people from Shetland to Dorset and from Cardiff to Belfast. That's the solidarity our movement was founded upon and I believe should continue to build. And the SNP want to portray this as a vote against the Tories. But the reality is that they said independence was the answer when we created the National Health Service. They said independence was the answer when we created the welfare state and when we introduced the minimum wage. And they say you can only make changes now with independence. This is not Scotland versus the Tories. This is about independence, no matter what the question and no matter when that question is put. And I hear some people say that this is a vote about independence and not the SNP. The political reality is that the Scottish Socialist Party has no MSPs. They have one councillor in the whole of Scotland. The Socialist Worker Party, no representation. The Green Party, 2 MSPs and a handful of councillors. And Solidarity, no representation. So I'm afraid it's not going to be any of these parties that's going to form the government if Scotland goes independent. And history tells us if Scotland agrees to separation, then it's the party who advocated that move that wins the election thereafter, will write the constitution and will implement its economic strategy. And as Alex Salmon told us this morning, what's on the table is the white paper. The white paper is the SNP's plan. There is nothing else from the yes side on the table. So we have to analyse it and offer a critique and an alternative. And it is a remarkable document. It promotes a vision of a country where everything that is bad miraculously disappears and everything good in life just gets better, all with a cross on a ballot paper. A place with its economy based on oil that will never run out, where everything is green, but we scrap air passenger duty and build new dual carriageways, where the bank of a foreign country controls the currency, where we have a monarchy, NATO and the EU, but at the same time we're somehow independent, where business competition increases but so does the minimum wage, where childcare is expanded, unfortunately just not now, where we'll become a progressive beacon, but where bankers and big businesses get a corporation tax cut of £350 million a year. A land where everything is better and yet it costs us nothing. It is simply not credible and it's not the real world. So for me, public services are the key to this debate. Good schools and hospitals, social work and other services, I believe, are the civilising force in our society. But you cannot build Scandinavian levels of public services at the same time as levy Texan levels of corporation tax. And what would happen if we cut corporation tax in Scotland? We might attract foreign investment. But do we not think that we would then see England do the same to compete, then Wales do the same to compete with England? And what happens then when they've all cut corporation tax by 3%? We're back to square one and the competition starts again. And we end up in a spiral to the bottom on terms and conditions too. And we know that trickle-down economics has failed across the globe. yet it appears to be an experiment that the Scottish Government want to repeat in an independent Scotland. And if this was such a great wheeze, why are the Germans and the French and others not doing it too? You know, the corporation tax rate in Germany is 30%. Norway, it's 28%. Even Professor Joseph Stiglitz, Alex Salmond's own economic advisor, said of this policy, and I quote, "It's just a gift to the corporation and will increase inequality in our society." James Daunt, the head of Watterson's Books, said it's a dash to the bottom and it is insanity, because personally I think schools and hospitals are rather a good idea. Somebody has to pay for them. I think I couldn't have put it better myself. And what about this issue of currency? Well, I think the proposal for a currency union is a spectacularly bad idea. What this means is that we would hand control and influence over the interest rates, the borrowing, the regulation, and all other areas affecting the currency to what by then will be a foreign bank, the Bank of England. And the rest of the UK Chancellor would be in control of that. And Scotland would have no politicians at Westminster to have any say on any legislation relating to our currency. And the rest of the UK Chancellor would want to sign off our budget, they would want to say on our benefits, our tax rates, and everything else to do with our currency. So a sterling zone, far from bringing powers to Scotland, gives powers and sovereignty away. And as the Eurozone has taught us, economic union without political union doesn't work. As Jim Sillars, former deputy leader of the SNP, says, the policy is stupidity on stilts, and I agree with him. And of course, with all those Scottish non-Tory MPs removed from the Westminster Parliament, it will make it all the more likely that a future rest of the UK government would be a Tory one. Now, what does that mean? Not just for us, but for our brothers and sisters in England, Wales, and elsewhere in the UK. And this leads me to a key point. Historically, it has been the trade union movement, steeped in the values of cooperation and solidarity, that has been proudly at the forefront of radical change, demanding and securing the right to vote, the welfare state, the NHS and the minimum wage, and challenging the power of big business. So would dividing trade unions along national lines lead us to different struggles and different campaigns? Would it see different terms and conditions emerge, not always in our favour? And would the power and influence of capital find rich pickings in an economy the Scottish Government wants to make the most competitive in Europe? Or are we better, stronger and more able to defend our members and ourselves when we're working together and acting in the interests of working people across the UK? The mantra of our movement is unity is strength, and we forget that at our peril. Tell me if you've ever seen a banner that says disunity is strength. And can I nail the biggest lie told to date in this campaign, and that is the lie about the privatisation of Scotland's NHS in the event of a no vote. Scotland's NHS is fully devolved. It would take a vote of the Scottish Parliament to privatise it. No party in Scotland advocates that we do that. Not even the Tory party in Scotland. Although there is one person in Scotland who advocates the privatisation of the NHS. Mike Russell, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, not only wants to privatise the NHS, he wants to privatise the civil service too. Now, I abhor the privatisation we see in England, and Labour is committed to reversing it. But whether money is spent on the private sector or public sector in England, it is still public money, and Scotland gets its full share. And of course, the SNP argument only stacks up if you believe that private healthcare is cheaper and as efficient than publicly provided healthcare. It never, ever is. So on no level does that argument stack up, and they need to end the lies as soon as we can get them to shut up. And I would like to see a different Scotland emerge after September the 18th, one that finances public services, where our young people have opportunities to thrive and flourish, and an education system that values colleges just as much as it values universities, where our NHS is fully staffed and resourced, and our older people cared for with dignity and respect, where the taxation system redistributes our wealth through progressive taxation, tackling wealth and health, inequality and poverty. that lifts the standard of services and redemocratises local government, puts full employment at the centre of a national crusade. That doesn't require constitutional change, that requires political will. So, we have a choice on September the 18th. We can have the White Paper's vision, or we can have a Labour vision. We can keep the pound, avoid the mess that a sterling zone will bring, avoid our budget, tax rates, benefit rates, and financial regulation being signed off by the Chancellor of another country, or we can have the nonsense on stilts of a currency union. We can maintain the Barnett formula and UK-wide redistribution, where Scotland gets a greater share of public spending, or with independence it can be scrapped. We can have an industrial policy that develops and diversifies our economy, or one reliant on oil price volatility. We can have progressive taxation. We have 50 pence rate for those earning over 150,000, or we can cut taxes and public services whilst rewarding the rich. We can have corporate taxes the same across the UK, or tax competition in a race to the bottom. We can use procurement rules to end contractors paying under the living wage. We can end 0 hours contract and blacklisting, or we can see, as we did a few weeks ago, the SNP vote these progressive steps down. We can see the railways brought back into common or not-for-profit ownership, or we can continue to shovel money into subsidising the private sector rip-off of passengers. And we can free up local government and give it more powers and let councils manage their own finances again, helping stem the 40,000 job losses councils have experienced under the SNP's stewardship. And we can use existing services, or we can create, spending millions setting up a new motor services agency, security and intelligence services, Scottish Rail Regulator, Scottish Air Traffic Control, Scottish Civil Aviation Authority, Scottish Passport Service, a Tribunal Service, Industrial Relations Service, and so on and so on. All these new agencies we would have to set up. And do you know, it cost 180 million to set up Police Scotland alone. And yet they predict it will only cost 200 million to set up a new country. Pie in the sky. And we can devolve powers over a whole range of issues while maintaining the links we have across the UK. These are the choices you have to make on September the 18th. There's no shortcut to a more progressive and more socially just society. We'll only win that through collective action and shared struggle. And a low-tax Scotland at the mercy of the corporate giants, who in an independent Scotland will still operate from the City of London, but with no political representatives to have any influence over them, I believe is a nightmare scenario for working people in Scotland. So I appeal to you to vote no on September the 18th, but that is not a no for the status quo, it's a no for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for your very powerful and clear speech. I think you speak for many people in the room and what you've said tonight, and particularly on the point which you ended on, which is that a vote no is not a vote for the status quo. And I believe that the majority of people in the Labour movement believe that to be true. So thank you for that contribution. And now I'd like to call on John Foster to address you.
I speak from the position of the Red Paper on Scotland. There was a Red Paper published earlier this year, but the original Red Paper was published in 1975. And it was the first comprehensive statement of the need for a Scottish Parliament, not a Scottish Parliament of an independent Scotland, but a Scottish Parliament that represented working people and had the power to use the power of working people against big business and capital. And that Red Paper and that movement came from the mobilisation of working people in the 1970s around all the struggles of the miners and the shipbuilders, the great struggle against the Industrial Relations Act, which had at its heart the issue of the right to work, and with that, the right to have some control over capital. That was the perspective then, and it was a very powerful and important part of the movement for a Scottish Parliament that was eventually created in 1997. That Parliament did not have all the powers that one would want. It did not have the power to own capital, to take action against big business in the way that one would want. But it did have some powers. The Red Paper was republished with contributions from Neil and many others earlier this year, and that put those perspectives in a new context. And Neil, I think, has put that progressive alternative immensely eloquently. What I wanted to do was more touch on an ideological issue. I wanted to introduce James Connolly into the debate. Maybe Comrade George will be doing that later, but I wanted to introduce James Connolly. Now, it might be a dangerous thing to do. There may be some people in this audience who would say, oh, well, James Connolly, he would automatically be supporting independence, wouldn't he? But he wouldn't. James Connolly was a member of the ILP along with Keir Hardie. He supported Home Rule, independence for Ireland, Home Rule for Scotland. And he did it because, of course, he was a socialist who made a concrete historical analysis of the reality in which he worked. And he knew first that Scotland was not an oppressed nation in the same way as Ireland. It was a capitalist and colonialising country with an imperialist ruling class. Scotland's second formal colony, the first was Nova Scotia, was, of course, Ulster, proclaimed by the Scottish Parliament in the 1620s. So, no comparison in terms of the position of Scotland and Ireland as an oppressed nation. It would have been unthinkable to link the two for Connolly. But secondly, Connolly, like Hardie, knew that it was only the combined strength of workers across Britain that could take on the power of capital both in Scotland and at British level. Now, I raise Connolly because of his comment on state power in Ireland. And he made a very well-known quotation, which I can, but he also went on afterwards. He said, you can hoist a green flag over Dublin Castle, but nothing will change if land and capital remain in private hands. What he went on to say, and it's very relevant to where we are at the moment, nationalism without socialism, without a reorganisation of society on the basis of a broader and more developed form of common property, is tantamount to a public declaration that our oppressors have so far succeeded in inoculating us with their perverted concepts of justice and morality that we had finally decided to accept those conceptions for our own. In other words, you accept the ideas of the ruling class. And that's the real danger, I think, we face in this debate today in Scotland. That a majority will accept the declarations of the SNP and of the Souters and the McCalls and the Matthewsons, that Scotland is different. Not really a capital society, it's social democratic. It believes in fairness and believes in equality. And I think everybody, I hope most people in this hall will know that is not the case. But that is what Connolly was talking about back 100 years ago. That's what he was talking about. That's the danger. The loss of class politics. A loss of the understanding that there is a ruling class, and there is a ruling class in Scotland that represents the power of capital at British state level, and will continue to represent it after independence. Because the Lord Weirs and the Coates family and the big steel owners, they've not gone away. They've converted themselves into hedge fund managers, bankers. They commute between Edinburgh and London. That's who they are. And they've ensured that the SNP preserves all the key levers to enable them to maintain that state power. We already heard about it from Neil. Sterling, NATO, and the EU, not been mentioned, but we should say. Scotland, I think all objective figures will say it's got something of a bigger deficit than Britain as a whole, probably 8.7%. What does the Stability Treaty of 2012 say? It must be reduced to zero by 2018. That is the mandate. That means Scotland, if we go along with the White Paper and Alexander, will have not just continuing austerity, but worse austerity. Worse austerity. These are the levers that are left there in the hands of a ruling class that is both Scottish and British. The productive and, again, this has already been said by Neil, the productive and financial resources of Scotland are controlled from outside. Controlled basically from the City of London. The banks, and Agnes knows far more about this than I do, are entirely controlled basically by shareholders from outside Scotland. Entirely. Although they do have links with the investment managers and the hedge funds operating out of Edinburgh, who found them indispensable. And they want them continued there, because they use them. Oil, 90%, 99% controlled from outside. And all businesses in Scotland employing more than 250 people, 83% controlled from outside. In fact, if you look at the share registers, it's even more than that. And that gives the lie to the Scottish claim, that the SNP claim that the Scottish people are more wealthy than virtually anybody else in Europe. Well, yes, there is wealth in Scotland, but the profit income based on that capital goes outside. 80–90% of it goes outside. And of course it also makes a mockery of the SNP's claim about neoliberal growth being produced by cutting corporation tax. What will be the net result of that? Just more of that profit income going outside Scotland. That will be the result. But most importantly of all, it underlines the need for class unity at British level. Only on that basis can we tackle the power of the City of London. That's where the levers of capitalist power lie, and we need democratic power at that level in order to be able to combat them. That was the traditional demand of the STUC and of the left in Scotland in the 1970s. A Scottish Parliament, but its power against capital would be sustained by the unity of working people across Britain. That's where its power came from. The power that did, in fact, achieve everything that was achieved in the 1970s, and it was a lot. What we want, as I started out with, and I'll conclude, is a Home Rule Parliament in Edinburgh with power to own and control, and a Parliament in Westminster as a focus, as in the past, for class mobilisation, with democratic power to take on big business and redistribute wealth and power across Britain in face of social need. A federalism that is not constitutionalist, but allows the progressive mobilisation of working people across the nations of Britain. We've only got, as our chairperson said, 4 weeks left before the referendum. There is a mountain of work to do. It's a matter of reaffirming class politics and defeating false perceptions of the SNP and its left allies. Scotland is not different. We do live in a class society, and we have to expose where state power lies and how it is exercised. I hope people will go away from this meeting having heard Neil and Agnes and George, and in fact take part in the various campaigning organisations in order to mobilise people to get out there and vote for a class alternative, for something that's going to be new and better, and will mobilise both the power of working people in Scotland and across Britain. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John. And for reminding us that in the debates that I've listened into, I'm sad to say there has not been enough discussion about the power of the City of London. And even if you think that the issues that ordinary people, whatever they're planning to vote on the September the 18th talk about, is the power of the energy companies to fix prices, the power of the banks, bankers' bonuses, probably more powerful than they were before the crash. Workers' rights has not been a central issue in the referendum campaign, so thank you, John, for reminding us of the reality of these important issues. I'd now like to call on Agnes Tomlie. Now, thank you very much, Agnes, for making it here tonight. And only finding out at the last minute you were in fact the speaker and not the chair. But anyway, look forward to what you've got to say this evening.
Symptomatic of the lifestyle that I'm living just now. I thought I was coming here to chair a CND meeting. You've seen the scribbling that is going on here. And just to make you aware just a bit about me, I work for the RBS, so I thank you, everybody in here, for all your money for keeping me in a job. But in saying that, you know, the system is wrong, it's corrupt, and it's absolutely stinking, and nothing has changed in the finance sector since the crash, and that's an outstanding piece of work for the Labour and Trade Union movement still to address. I'm also the past president of the STUC, and I'm currently an EC member of Unite, and both these organisations, so when I get quoted they know, that both these organisations have adopted by member consent a neutral position. I, on the other hand, am quite clear about my position. Comrades, we are faced with a Lib Dem government who have systematically cut and slashed at our people's lives, their jobs, and in their hopes, their benefits, and with promises of much more to come. In fact, we're also on a promise from the SNP that if we vote yes, that they're saying a yes vote will put us on the road to recovery and everything will be easy. Would it not? Let's vote yes in the referendum and everything will be okay. No more Tories. Aye, right. Right-wingers come in many guises, and I work with quite a few of them. I'm a trade union and Labour woman, and my perceptions are maybe slightly different. I believe in the collective, and I believe that we achieve much, much more together, much, much more in solidarity, and much, much more in support. And as a trade union woman, I often reflect on what we have achieved, things like equality legislation, the minimum wage, the National Health Service. None of these were achieved just by being Scottish. They were achieved by a fight and a campaign and a struggle across all of these islands. The outstanding one that I still would like to see achieved is the Robin Hood tax. I think that is wrong, that we have not addressed that, and I will continue to campaign that we should. Now, for me, this debate should be about socialism and not separation, about decent jobs, decent wages, decent housing, and dignity for our older people and our disabled. I believe that this referendum is a diversion from what we should be doing and what our politicians should be spending their time on. I also believe that only the trade union and labour movement can deliver the kind of society based on social justice and fairness that we want to live in. We are currently witnessing an increase in the gap of earnings between the workers and the employers that's getting wider and wider and wider. And some people and some commenters were saying that it's maybe up to as much as 170 times. Where I work, it is a hell of a lot more than that, and it continues to rise. And it's unacceptable that in our society that this continues, and it has to be stopped. Now, people have talked about the status quo. The status quo is no longer acceptable. We have seen in this referendum, if it's done one thing, It has politicised our people. It has politicised our young people. Around 80% or more than that now of our young people are registered to vote. So after September, when we sit and reflect, and I believe it will be a no vote, when we sit and reflect about what we've achieved together to deliver that no vote, we need to harness that energy and start delivering the socialist Scotland that we absolutely need. Comrades, much is made of the currency. I actually don't care what it's called. It is actually after all, only a means of exchange. So you can call it whatever you like, or bobbies, I actually don't care. But it does, however, matter who controls it. And that is very, very important. So whatever Alex coming up with in the next couple of nights about how he's going to do A, B and C in the currency, they didn't get it quite right the first time round. It is disingenuous, and the currency is important. But I want to finish on a couple of personal notes, and that is in December last year at our Unite the Union Executive Council meeting, Tony Benn came along and he chatted to us and he gave us a talk, and then we did a question and answer session. And we know his history and we know the struggles that he's been involved in, and we know how much of a socialist that Tony was. So during the questions, I got a question and I asked him, if he had a vote in the Scottish referendum, how would he vote? And he said, oh, I would vote no. And he explained why, and I thought, well, do you know what? It's good enough for him, it's good enough for me.
Thank you, Agnes. I think many men and women in the audience will recognise the work that people like Agnes did in the women's movement. And I mention it because Agnes and I have been in the women's movement a very long time, and if it wasn't for the work that women like Agnes did, I would have not served 12 years in the Scottish Parliament. And to be fair, speaking I'm about to introduce now is the person who persuaded me. I don't know if you remember this, George. But I got a phone call, you must stand, and I needed some persuasion, and you invited me along for a coffee in the Baby Grand, where you gave me a great speech on all the reasons why you thought I would be a member of the Scottish Parliament. I've never forgotten it, and I've loved the 12 years, and I have to say that I have to give the credit to George Galloway for giving me that opportunity, because if it wasn't for him, and of course the wonderful campaign that we did run, I wouldn't have got the chance. But I think you might remember one of the many things that you used to talk about in the Labour movement. We used to always talk about Johnny Walker, who was a famous leader of train drivers union, Adelades, who used to say, I don't want to abuse my position in the chair, or my neutrality in the chair, but I'd just like to disagree with 99.9% of what the last speaker just said. It always got a laugh. I'm not going to abuse my position in the chair, but just one thing before I introduce George. Neil talked about flags, a lot of discussion about flags, and I just wanted to abuse my position in the chair just to ask you to give a round of applause to all of the political parties in Glasgow City Council, Labour, SNP and the Green Party and others who flew the flag for Palestine. And I'm sure George will remind us that Dundee was always first, and that he was had a great deal to do with that and has done wonderful work. Anyway, enough said. I know you're really looking forward to hearing what George Galloway has to say on the referendum. George.
Thank you very much. Thank you, comrades and friends, for arranging this meeting and for turning out for it. I hope you'll allow me a moment to abuse my position in this regard. I just heard as I was coming in the door of the death of my former colleague Sam Galbraith at the age of 68. Sam and I were elected on the same night in this city to the House of Commons in 1987, and I served many years in Parliament with him. He was a
good friend of mine, helped me through some difficult days, and he was a good representative of Labour in Scotland. He was the only, I think, brain surgeon that we had in our ranks, certainly at that time, and he used to say to me he'd like to look into the heads of some of our colleagues. And so I'm very sorry that he has passed away. This meeting has been some good old-time religion, fittingly, in this venue, and I hope to continue some of the themes that have been developed so far. I was very glad that Neil, with whom I spoke yesterday in Fauldhouse, in the Miners' Welfare Association, where hundreds of people gathered in a relatively small village in West Lothian, and he made some of the points yesterday that he made today. And the most important of them was the first one that he made, namely that none of us on this platform, at least, are here defending the status quo. In fact, the reason I have spoken at more than 20 meetings across Scotland so far, and will speak at more than 25 more in the next 30 days, sometimes 2 in one day, as yesterday in Fauldhouse and Motherwell, is this. I don't want to stand in front of a Union Jack. I don't even like the Union Jack. It's nothing to do with me, the Union Jack. I'm not here to defend the United Kingdom. I don't even believe in the United Kingdom, because I believe, like Connolly, that Ireland should be united and free, a point to which I shall return. But I do believe in the unity of the working class in this small island of Britain. And I do believe that if we sever it, that working people on both sides of the then existing border will be beggared, impoverished, but above all, weakened in their ability to challenge the forces that really control our society and that have been adumbrated by the others on the panel this evening. And I shall develop that point. But I wanted to start by drawing attention to the entirely false dichotomy which has emerged in this debate, that the division that matters is between either Scotland and England. If you're in the Twitter sphere, you'll know that there are apparently thousands, though it may only be hundreds with 10 accounts each, of people who believe that somehow the English are holding us back, and that if we were only free of the English, that we would be able to move further forward. When you challenge that false dichotomy, as I must, by pointing out that representing, as I do, virtually the poorest constituency in the entirety of this state, namely Bradford West, where the people are at the bottom of every league you'd want to be at the top of, and top of every league you'd want to be at the bottom of, they say, oh well, the north of England might be different. But that too is a false dichotomy. Because London, which they like to portray as paved with gold, in fact contains more poor people than all of Scotland or any other part of this state. In fact, within a 7-mile radius of the Houses of Parliament, more people are living in poverty than in the whole of Scotland. It's an entirely false dichotomy. The division is not between us here and them there, or us here and them there against them there. The dichotomy that matters is the one that John Foster so brilliantly expounded, between those who have and those who have not. And that will be entirely unaffected if we become a separate state on the 18th of September. The people who have the wealth and the power will be untouched by that decision. What will be gravely affected by that decision is our ability ever to take power and wealth away from them and redistribute it amongst the majority. And that ought to be obvious. It's really not rocket science. On the parliamentary level, 99% of the members of the British Parliament from Scotland are not Tories. So if you take all the Scottish MPs out of Parliament, by definition you are giving the Conservatives what will be 49 MPs of a start. And I don't know about you, I mean no disrespect to the members of the Labour Party present, but I don't think Ed Miliband has the stuff to overtake a start of 49 MPs. So what you're actually doing is not getting out from under the Tories, you're actually keeping the Tories in power in London, in what will continue to be the British state. Now you might say, if you believe in Scots to the lifeboats and leave the rest on the sinking hulk, well, at least we'll be free of the Tories. But of course we won't. If Alex Salmond has his way, we'll be using a currency issued by, controlled by the government in London that will be perpetually Tory. What's independent about that? In fact, that's less independent than Scotland is now. Because the people who are issuing the currency and who will decide our budget here, decide on interest rates, decide on taxation policy, because nobody gives somebody else who's walking out the door on them the right to continue to use the credit card, the family credit card. I never knew a divorce like that. And believe me, I know about divorce. I never knew a divorce where you said to the person you're begging to stay, by the way, continue to use my credit card as you will. They will not. In fact, Alex Salmond will not even be permitted to implement his one and only plan, which is to continue to use sterling as a currency. And as has been said, doesn't much matter to working people who don't have that much of it, what the currency is called, but who controls it is of vital importance. In fact, if Alex Salmond had had the courage of his convictions, he would have said that an independent Scotland will use the euro. How's that going? You can understand why he didn't propose that one. And that leaves, therefore, only one alternative: the invention of a new currency. And I use the word invention advisedly. I don't know what we'd call it, maybe the groat, but it would be based upon the single commodity that they ever talk about, which is the most price unstable commodity in the world. In my lifetime, and I'm not as old as I look, oil has been as low as $12 a barrel and as high as $156 a barrel. Nobody knows what it will be tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade. And in any case, it's running out. It is, as John said, 99% owned by foreigners in any case. And incidentally, Mrs. Thatcher's first act in 1979 was to abolish the British National Oil Corporation, introduced by Mr. Benn, which gave us the only stake in the oil industry that we have ever had. And in parenthesis, how did Mrs. Thatcher get in? She got in because 11 drunken SNP MPs, because for them every night was Burns night, followed her into the lobby to bring down the Labour government in 1979 with results that everybody in here knows about. So the next time you hear the SNP talking about the Tories, remind them who brought Mrs. Thatcher to power in the first place. It's going to run out in 2050. Now, I'll not be here in 2050, but my children and their children will be here in 2050. Who's going to leave to their children and their grandchildren a total dependence on a price unstable commodity which is in any case going to be finished in 2050. And every oil well in the North Sea will have to be capped. And the cost of that capping will then be spread amongst 5 million people instead of amongst 65 million people. And then, as has just been said, one of our speakers has just come back from Orkney. That raises a question, because the people in Orkney and Shetland don't want to be part of an independent Scotland. In fact, they've never wanted to be part of Scotland in the first place. They were gifted to a Scottish king and queen as a wedding present. If Scotland's going to be independent, they want to be in Norway. So what if they say it's our oil? We demand self-determination. We want a referendum. What's Alex Salmond going to do? Send the Navy? He's not going to have a Navy. He's just going to sink it. It's going to be dependent on the NATO Navy. Again, a subject to which I shall return. I want to deal with some, because this is a left meeting, I want to deal with some of the issues I don't normally get to deal with. John's touched on them. The idea that Scotland is an occupied, oppressed nation could not be further from the truth. The only people occupying and oppressing us are the capitalist class who will continue to occupy and oppress us after independence. There's no English army occupying. Somebody tweeted me this afternoon, imagine, Polly, 5 weeks after mass slaughter was unleashed on Palestine, to say, how come you're in favour of freedom in Palestine but not in favour of freedom in... Can you think of anything more obscene than to compare us to the people in Palestine? Occupied by a foreign army, murdered, massacred, quarantined, put into concentration camps, their leaders assassinated. Can you think of anything more obscene than that comparison? Or they say, again this happened today, you're in favour of freedom and reunification in Ireland. Well, apart from the clue being in the word unification, apart from the clue being in the inference of opposition to partition, Ireland was occupied by Scotland and England. Scotland is not oppressed or occupied by England. Scotland and England together occupied and oppressed most of the world. The idea that we are a people who need freed is belied by the simple fact that the SNP have existed for the best part of 100 years. We've had universal suffrage for the best part of 100 years. At any time, we could have voted for independence, and we would have had it. And as Pauline said in her introduction, or inferred, no, it was Neil in his speech, they were in favour of independence before we even had a National Health Service, before we had all the good things that we have managed to create. They were in favour of independence. They were in favour of independence before we even discovered oil. I don't know what we were, I forget now what we were going to live on. Then, short breed exports, whiskey exports, square sausage exports, selling ice cream to tourists. I forget now what it was going to be. But they said that independence was the answer before we even discovered the oil that they're now utterly dependent on for their case for independence. And in parenthesis, to the man, if he's in the hall, who called me Lord Haw-Haw earlier, they were even in favour of independence when Hitler was at the Channel ports and when the rest of the people on this island were preparing to defend their very lives and the very existence of this country. And the leaders of the SNP were interned during the Second World War for their collaboration with Hitler and Hitler fascism. And the leading man, Arthur Donaldson, was then elected in 1960, 15 years after the end of the Second World War, in which he'd been interned, was elected as the president of the SNP. And he was the president of the SNP between 1960 and 1969. It's a bit much. A party that was led for nearly a decade by people who collaborated with Hitler, calling anybody else a quisling. Don't you think? Don't you think? So, my view is really simple. When I say I'm part of the union, I mean the Transport and General Workers Union. I don't mean I'm here to defend the British state as it is. I want to change it almost entirely. But we will not ever change it if we weaken ourselves, if we cut ourselves in half. And lastly, I want to say this. Because I have, for 18 years as a Member of Parliament for this constituency in Glasgow, and for a few years before that, and several years since that, have lived mainly in England, I want to say that there is no fundamental difference between working people in Scotland and working people in England. They work for the same employers, they're members of the same trade union, they watch the same television, the same films, above all they speak the same language, they eat the same food, mainly curry, on both sides of the border. It is, in my opinion, almost never a good idea to break up countries. The problem is not that there are too few countries in the world, but that there are too many countries in the world. I want to see working people coming closer and closer together, not further and further apart. And it's one of the reasons why young people, Salmon thought it was a great quiz to cut for one time only the voting age from 18 to 16, thinking that the young people were daft. But young people, in larger numbers than the rest of the population, are going to vote no. Why? Because young people know better than if you've got young teenage children at home, you bet that they're on Twitter or Facebook or the internet right now. Young people know that erecting new barriers and borders and boundaries is completely nonsensical in the second decade of the 21st century. It's not that I'm not Scottish, I'm just as Scottish as Alex Salmon. It's not that I don't like Scottish culture or life in Scotland, still less that I don't like the beauty of Scotland and so on. It's that I don't believe I need to choose. I don't believe I need to choose between being Scottish, between being British, between being European, and above all, being a member of the human race. That's why I'm here to say, just say no.
Thank you very much, George.